Imagine a shared apartment with 4 roommates. On Monday, a single dirty coffee mug sits in the sink. By Friday, the counters are completely buried under a towering, festering pile of rotting plates and molded pans. It is tempting to assume this happens because the roommates have conflicting standards of hygiene, but the exact opposite is true. All 4 roommates genuinely agree that they want a clean kitchen. They share the exact same goal, yet the kitchen remains filthy. The clean kitchen functions as a public good. Public goods possess 2 specific traits. They are non-excludable, meaning no roommate can be physically locked out of the kitchen, and they are non-rivalrous, meaning one roommate enjoying the clean space does not prevent the others from enjoying it too. When it is time to scrub the pans, an individual roommate faces a strict mathematical calculation. The cost of washing the dishes, expending personal time and physical effort, is immediate, and it is borne entirely by that single individual. But the benefit, a clean room, is divided equally among everyone who lives there. This imbalance creates a massive incentive for what economists call free riding. The strictly rational, mathematically optimal choice for any individual roommate is to withhold their physical effort, avoid the personal cost, and wait for someone else to do the heavy lifting. If every single roommate arrives at this exact same logical calculation, 0 dishes are washed. Private rationality guarantees collective ruin. This inescapable mathematical trap, where rational self-interest actively destroys a shared group interest, is known as the collective action problem. It is the foundational axiom of political economy. Game theory maps this domestic paradox onto a formal structure known as the prisoner's dilemma. When 2 actors evaluate their options to either cooperate or defect, the matrix reveals the hidden gravity pulling them toward failure. Defection functions as the dominant strategy. Whether your opponent decides to cooperate with you or betray you, your highest personal payoff always comes from defecting. Without an outside enforcer altering the rules, mutual betrayal is the inevitable, logical outcome. This mathematical trap scales relentlessly. It dictates the behavior of 2 isolated prisoners, 4 roommates, or hundreds of thousands of interconnected actors trying to manage a shared system. In 1965, the economist Mancur Olson published a logical proof exposing this rift between individual rationality and group efficacy. He dismantled the centuries-old pluralist assumption that groups of individuals with common interests will organically organize to achieve those interests. This diagram illustrates the dual pathways of cooperative failure. Left, Olson's logic shows actors rationally withholding capital, causing under-provision of a public good. Right, Hardin's framework demonstrates the tragedy of the commons, where individuals aggressively over-extract a shared resource until it collapses. Recognizing this structure corrects a massive pedagogical misconception. Collective action failures do not occur because populations lack scientific information, disagree on the objective, or harbor malicious intent. The failure is mechanical. Whenever an objective is non-excludable, private calculation actively dismantles public utility. That dynamic sets the stage for gridlock on a global scale. As a group expands from a handful of people to millions, the collective action problem becomes exponentially more paralyzing. Group size acts as a severe structural constraint. In massive, latent groups, a dynamic called fractional impact takes over. An individual's solitary contribution to a massive system is statistically invisible. This solidifies the logic that their personal effort is completely wasted if others do not act, and entirely unnecessary if others do. This fractional impact generates a political economy dynamic known as diffuse costs versus concentrated benefits. It explains precisely why narrow, specialized interest groups consistently defeat massive majorities in democratic legislative systems. Small, highly concentrated groups, like oligopolies or specialized industries, can easily overcome the logistical costs of organizing. Because the financial payoff for securing a protective tariff or subsidy is astronomically high per capita, it is highly rational for these few actors to hire lobbyists and coordinate campaigns. Contrast that concentrated wealth with the general public. A protectionist policy like the U.S. sugar program costs American consumers nearly $3 billion annually. But because that massive cost is spread across hundreds of millions of people, the individual burden is roughly $10 a year. It is economically irrational for an individual citizen to expend the time and capital required to lobby lawmakers just to save $10. Scale also distorts time. The discount rate problem shows that human beings, corporations, and political leaders inherently devalue future payoffs. They heavily discount long-term benefits in order to avoid imposing immediate, visible economic pain. Large groups facing distant threats are mathematically paralyzed. A toxic combination of invisible individual impact, diffuse burdens, and severe discount rates ensures inaction. Apply that paralysis to the ultimate geopolitical scale. The shared apartment kitchen becomes the Earth's atmosphere, a borderless shared commons. A stable climate is the purest form of a non-excludable global public good. No nation can be physically blocked from enjoying a habitable planet, regardless of their specific carbon footprint.
Consequently, the overriding incentive for any sovereign state is to continue burning cheap, energy-dense fossil fuels to drive rapid domestic economic growth. The rational play is to let other nations bear the heavy economic costs of transitioning to renewable energy and free ride on their efforts. The chronic failure of international climate treaties is an N-person prisoner's dilemma playing out on a planetary scale. The latent group size here is the entire international system, coordinating nearly 200 sovereign states, each guarding their own economic interests without a centralized global enforcer, maximizes organizational friction. Political survival directly triggers the discount rate. Elected leaders refuse to impose immediate, concentrated carbon taxes on their current voters today because the reward is preventing a diffuse, shared disaster decades in the future. We see identical failures in global pandemic responses. Eradicating a highly contagious disease is a weakest link public good. It is only as strong as the containment efforts of the least capable state. During a crisis, actors face overwhelming incentives to defect, hoard vital supplies, and free ride on the expensive vaccine development of others. At this geopolitical level, the information deficit fallacy is especially dangerous. Providing more precise climate data or raising global awareness cannot override the hardwired mathematical incentive to free ride. Climate change represents a super wicked problem because it perfectly weaponizes every single mechanism of collective action failure. It combines massive group size, highly diffused costs, and severe discount rates, all at the highest possible stakes. If the mathematics of game theory rigidly dictate defection, how does human civilization manage to function at all? We survive by artificially engineering the rules of engagement. By implementing strict penalties, monitoring, and exclusive rewards, we physically alter the payoff matrix, making cooperation mathematically more rational than defection. One top-down macroeconomic solution is hegemonic stability theory. Here, a single massive superpower unilaterally pays the immense military and financial costs to provide a global public good, like open sea lanes or a stable reserve currency, simply because they benefit so heavily from the resulting stable system. The primary institutional solution is the creation of organizations like the United Nations or the World Trade Organization. These frameworks are designed to lower transaction costs, provide neutral third-party monitoring, and extend the shadow of the future by locking states into repeated, predictable interactions. When negotiations stall, these institutions utilize a mechanism called issue linkage. They force cooperation by tying an unfavorable policy in one area to a highly desirable outcome in a completely unrelated area, bridging conflicting economic realities to forge a grand bargain. Solutions do not only come from massive bureaucracies. The groundbreaking empirical research of Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom proved that localized, bottom-up systems are highly effective. Ostrom discovered that local communities, from Swiss alpine farmers to Maine lobster fishers, can successfully self-govern shared resources for centuries. They bypass the tragedy of the commons without needing top-down state coercion or the complete privatization of the market. This polycentric governance requires strict institutional design criteria. The community must establish clearly defined boundaries, utilize continuous local monitoring, and enforce a system of graduated sanctions that mildly penalize first-time errors but severely punish systemic freeriders. Whether enforced by a superpower's military fleet, a complex UN treaty, or the social pressure of a local fishing council, survival requires meticulous institutional design to identify and punish those who defect. The collective action problem is not a neutral equation. Depending on the ideological lens of the observer, the fundamental nature of the problem changes entirely. The liberal institutionalist perspective views the problem as a tragic friction of transaction costs and imperfect information. They argue it can be fixed by designing better, neutral international organizations focused on absolute gains, ensuring that everyone walks away mathematically wealthier. The Marxist critique argues this standard theory completely ignores structural power. For Marxists, the problem isn't equal actors failing to cooperate. It is the capitalist class actively utilizing collective action through the state to maintain extreme power asymmetries and systematically exploit both labor and the environment. The realist perspective rejects the optimism of institutions entirely. Realists argue the international system is inherently anarchic, and states are exclusively obsessed with relative gains. This creates a fatal strategic trap. A realist state will rationally choose to defect on providing a public good, even if cooperation would make them wealthier, if they calculate that a rival state will gain slightly more from the deal. In the realist calculus, economic imbalances translate directly into military vulnerabilities. Return to the rotting apartment kitchen. The roommates all want a clean space, just as the international community all wants a stable climate and a thriving global economy. Mere agreement on a shared goal is never enough to guarantee success. The trajectory of 21st century global governance and our ability to survive existential threats will not be dictated by the unity of our desires. It will be dictated by our institutional ingenuity in solving the collective action problem.